Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, discussing and dissecting another turbulent week in world affairs alongside four distinguished international correspondents. In a week where assassinations have continued within the top ranks of Iran's regime, the Minister of Intelligence, the commander of the besieged paramilitary force and the powerful security chief Ali Larijani included. But a weakened government seems to have had little bearing on Tehran's retaliation across Israel and 9 Gulf states. Just 1 week ago, President Trump spoke of a war that was very complete, pretty much. And that appears to be premature and overconfident. There's no more talk of a Venezuelan-style regime change that works for Washington, and Israel's actual cooperation with Washington has come under scrutiny after Israeli airstrikes on the world's largest natural gas field at South Pars, which provides power for an estimated 70-80% of Iranians. President Trump's immediate response: he knew nothing. Insiders questioned that remarks. Critics claimed it spoke of the US getting sucked further into an Israeli agenda. Israel's Prime Minister said that was nonsense.
Does anyone really think that someone can tell President Trump what to do? Come on. President Trump always makes his decisions on what he thinks is good for America, and may I add, I think what is also good for future generations.
It's been a week that the human and economic cost of the war in the Gulf was felt more deeply around the world, plus a reignited conflict in Lebanon with 1 million people now displaced. The relentless creeping up of the cost of oil is now affecting more than 85 countries in Europe, Asia, America, Africa, made worse after the Iranian attack on Qatar's Ras Laffan gas field, one of the most important global energy hubs that supplies up to 20% of the world's liquid natural gas. Combined with Iran's effective blockade of the Straits of Hormuz, to which President Trump called on world powers to act and join the US, send their warships to protect ships from drone attacks, the lack of any immediate response or readiness from NATO allies led to President Trump once again questioning the point of the organisation. Cowards, a foolish mistake, he said, adding the US doesn't need their help. Though his administration asked, not for the first time, where's the gratitude?
The world, the Middle East, our ungrateful allies in Europe, even segments of our own press should be saying one thing to President Trump: thank you.
It's been a week where Denmark's public broadcaster DR published revelations that Danish troops rushed to Greenland back in January carrying explosive, preparing to blow up the airport's runways. Such was the fear from European intelligence chiefs that President Trump would order a military takeover of the island. Danish soldiers are also said to have carried blood banks to treat those wounded in the event of a battle. Denmark's government has declined to comment. And it's been a week that sporting history was controversially rewritten in the African Cup of Nations, 2 months after Senegal took the trophy, beating Morocco in the final 1-0. The Confederation of African Football has overturned the result, awarding Morocco a 3-0 default win, even though the Atlas Lions didn't score a goal. The move, unprecedented in international football history, was taken as a result of Senegal's players walking off the pitch in protest at a controversial penalty. Cue a new protest in Senegal, a decision and an unexpected celebration in Rabat. Let me introduce today's panel. In the studio with me is Laura Kayali. Evening, Laura. Laura is the defence correspondent at Politico Europe. Before that, she covered tech policy for Politico for 8 years. A combination of both industries. Strategies are key to shaping the Iran war right now. It is great to have you with us, Laura. Let me ask about one thing, which is one thing you've been looking at this week, the prospects of Germany and France coming together, developing a next-generation fighter jet. It's kind of been off and on again. You've called it Groundhog Day.
Yes, because we've been doing this for almost 10 years now. It started in 2017. We're now in 2026, and there's still no breakthrough on whether they want to do it or not. French President Emmanuel Macron is very, very keen on doing it. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz seems to be a bit less enthusiastic, at least less ready to compromise, to reach an agreement. And for Macron, it's really key to his legacy. So that also explains why he's not ready to kind of unplug the whole program. So they decided this week to give it a last chance. But last summer, they also said there would be a last chance. So it's like several last chances. So let's see if he drags it until 2027 so that the next French president actually unplugs it, or if it's the truly last chance.
There is a rival project as well. This is the UK, Italy, Japan. They're trying to come up with their own next-generation supersonic stealth fighter to replace in the UK the Typhoons, Mitsubishi F2 for Japan. And there's a twist. Poland are interested in joining in.
Yes, exactly. This week, the Polish government openly said that they were interested in joining and that there were discussions about how they could join. The members of this fighter jet, which is called GCAP, are open to having new partners, but the question is who will do what, because that's the key thing. When you have like several countries coming together, you have to give like each country's industry stuff to do, to develop. So the question is, if Poland does join, what would the Polish industry's role be? Would Poland just like pay, but with no industrial returns? Like those are like many questions that would need to be answered.
So expedited efforts, but these are still long-term goals. Thank you, Laura. It's great, and it's going to be great to hear your thoughts tonight and analysis. We're also joined by Dalal Mawad, Paris-based correspondent for Al Arabi, winner of the Samir Kassir Press Freedom Prize for her reportage on Lebanon. She's also the author of All She Lost, the explosion in Lebanon, the collapse of a nation and the women who survived. It is great to see you as well tonight,
Thank
Dalal.
you for having me, Gavin.
More than 1 million people displaced in Lebanon. President Trump says he can't believe people would still live there.
Yes, 20% of the population is displaced, and we're talking about more than 1,000 dead since this new cycle of violence has started. I think the Lebanese are an exhausted people at this point. I myself left 5 years ago because I was tired of fighting and surviving every day. I've been following, the Lebanon story from Paris, and it's heartbreaking to see my country dragged in another war that it does not want, it did not seek. And Gavin, unfortunately, there's no end in sight at this point. I've spoken to a lot of diplomats in Europe this week, and they're telling me that the US is blocking any de-escalation efforts in Lebanon, including French mediation efforts. And for now, the Israelis are going to go ahead with their military operation as long as the US does not pull the plug. And it looks like the cost for Lebanon is going to be very, very high, unfortunately. And we don't know where the military operation is going, but it looks more and more like they're isolating the south of Lebanon. There's a ground invasion that's taking place. And there are real concerns, Gavin, not just about what's happening on the ground at this moment, but what will happen to Lebanon as an entity. Its boundaries changing on the long term, its geography, people not able to go back. Israel has a plan to have a buffer zone for 15 kilometers beyond the border. This is a long-term occupation. I'm worried about a Golan Heights scenario happening in the south of Lebanon. So the cost is very, very high.
We'll get into some of the details shortly. It is great to have your thoughts here as well tonight. You talk about the Litani River, the idea of setting up a buffer zone there. I want to also know about a bit more on the US and talk Syria as well. Let's go to Budapest. Let's bring in Victoria Sjödöld, senior journalist, editor at the independent news website and magazine HVG, the weekly world economy. Victoria, welcome to the programme. It is a brilliant week to have you with us. We've seen large rallies starting in Hungary ahead of elections there in 3 weeks' time. Two main rivals mobilising their support base this weekend. And you've become known as a Hungary-splainer for your analysis. We're going to get to some of the details in the programme, but tell me about one thing I'm interested in. You've touched upon something called the propaganda war, feeding into the campaign, forgive the pun, but you've literally picked up on food recipes that are now the new tool for pro-government campaigns.
Very good evening to you, and thank you for having me. Yeah, actually, propaganda has really stepped up in Hungary, and this is something that has been going on for a while, but recipes that have appeared in the pro-government media are actually showing recipes that are bashing the opposition candidate Peter Magyar. And I think this is something that is quite extraordinary and we haven't really seen before. For example, they have some recipes called Kyiv chicken with external support or Brussels chicken breast. So I think this really shows that this is crunch time in the Hungarian elections and we only have 23 days left, and probably the government propaganda is trying everything to show the opposition candidate in a bad light.
And we're going to talk about in the programme as well, rallies and suddenly politics mixing with crowd numbers, who says who had what. That's all going to be relevant tonight. Let's complete a lineup. Let's cross to Dubai and welcome back to the programme Yaroslav Trofimov, Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent of the Wall Street Journal, author of No Country for Love, Our Enemies Will Vanish, the Russian invasion, Ukraine's war of independence, and the siege of Mecca as well. Yaroslav, fantastic to have you with us as well. Congratulations this week too, winning the Overseas Press Club's Flora Lewis Award for Best Commentary on International News. This is a series of pieces, and it's centred on the theme of lawless world order and raw power of imperial ambition. Tell us about those pieces, Yaroslav, given the events still playing out.
Well, a lot of them basically covered the ground of what we're witnessing now. These are pieces about U.S. ambitions in Greenland. These are pieces about the Middle East and about this really developing breakup between Europe and the United States. Sort of the end of the transatlantic alliance as the U.S. embarks on the same kind of imperial policies that Russia has been pursuing and that China also pursues in Asia.
Have you been celebrating? Have you had a chance? You're in Dubai. I'm guessing it's straight back to the desk, isn't it?
Well, more like going around than the desk. And, Dubai is now another country at war. So I am seeing through my windows the same Iranian Shahed drones that, with which we become all too familiar in my city of birth, in Kyiv, in Ukraine. And, we're hearing bangs of missile interceptors, every few hours. There's sort of no escape from war, I guess, nowadays. There are so many countries to which it came. And, here in the Arab Emirates, it's a country that did not invade anyone. The country that found itself hostage of this war didn't want. And that is now getting pummeled by the Iranian missiles and drones. Just for comparison, the UAE got more than 2,000 of these strikes, which is much more than what Israel got from Iran, because obviously Israel is much further away and the UAE is next door.
Yaroslav, it is good to have you back with us. OK, let's begin. It was around 4 o'clock Saturday morning in Tehran when the first reports came through via the state news agency Fars that the US has attacked Hague Island, Iran's single most crucial oil export facility, and from where around 90% of exported oil leaves the country, mainly destined for China. It was an operation said to have lasted 2 hours, non-stop airstrikes and explosions. President Trump calling it one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East, he claimed, saying the US had totally obliterated every military target and, quote, for reasons of decency. He claimed not to have wiped out the oil infrastructure on the island. He warned also of severe consequences if Iran doesn't open the Straits of Hormuz. By Wednesday, US Central Command, who are responsible for operations in the region, said more than 7,800 Iranian targets have been hit since the start of the war. That included a growing roll call of assassinated regime and military figures. Perhaps the most significant, Ali Larijani, the Secretary of Iran's National Security Council, a key power broker and decision maker. Israel's military said it hit more than 8,000 targets. The operation, a success so far, says Tel Aviv. The wider death toll in Iran, now estimated at more than 1,300 people in 3 weeks. By Wednesday afternoon, there was news of Israeli strikes on the largest gas field in the world, South Pars, considered the energy heart of Iran's economy. The Telegraph called it the strike that changed the war. Israel said the site was fueling the regime's military. Iran's regime, in turn, aimed 2 ballistic missiles just 100 kilometres south of South Pars, hitting Qatar's Ras Laffan plant, one of the strategically most important energy sites in the world, a global hub for liquefied natural gas. Iran also struck Kuwait's energy facilities as well, and the UAE continues its attacks as we speak on the Gulf. Yaroslav, we'll start with you. 3 weeks into what the US has said was a likely 4 to 6 week conflict. A new statement today from the Ayatollah Khamenei saying Iran has dealt enemies dizzying blows in the war. What's your reading of this week's developments?
Well, let's not forget that Iran has been attacking energy installations, refineries, ports, oil fields across the Gulf states since day one of the war. So it was Iran that started doing that. And then it used this Israeli strike on the South Pars field as a pretext to just go out all out and really inflict very, very devastating blows to the worldwide economy, really. So what's the scorecard 3 weeks into this war? Clearly, Iran has retained the ability to fire missiles and drones. We're not seeing any decline in the rate of fire, actually an increase, slight increase compared to about 10 days ago. And while it has not been able to disrupt life in cities like Dubai or Doha, you have electricity, water, airports functioning in UAE, it has been very successful against these energy installations that are flammable, easy to destroy, and very, very difficult to rebuild. And at the very same time, we also have Iran in firm control of the Strait of Hormuz, which is the strategic choke point on the way out of the Gulf, through which about 1/3 of the entire shipborne crude oil in the world usually passes, and also a large proportion of natural gas, fertilizers, aluminum, and other commodities. And so as long as Iran retains control of that waterway, which is international waters, it really is exerting enormous pressure on the global economy, on inflation, and political pressure on President Trump to wrap up this conflict as soon as possible. Problem is, of course, that it's no longer America's or Israel's choice when to end the war. And Iran has been very clear in the last days saying that it's in no rush for talks, it's in no rush for a ceasefire, and that what it really wants is a set of concessions from the US and Israel and Gulf states, reparations, so the US paying Iran for damages, guarantees of this sort of bombing never happening again. And also there is a new proposal up in the Iranian parliament that would enshrine this control over the Strait of Hormuz permanently, and make all countries and all ships passing through it pay fees to the Iranian state. Obviously, that's not something acceptable to the Gulf states or to the US. And so I think we are now in a stage where a swift end to the war is unlikely.
Yes, because the US... No, your point is valid, Yaroslav. The US and Israel do not seem to be in perfect harmony, despite words to the contrary as to whether they would want to end the war at the same time. And also Iran, as you say, might want to fight on. It's existential. I heard one commentator, Vali Nasser, talking about this being seen as by insiders as, quote, the final battle. Dalal, just listening to Yaroslav, one thing that strikes me is President Trump saying today, I've got nobody to talk to in Iran. There is nobody. I'm just wondering whether you thought the biggest assassination this week, Ali Larijani, was he a figure he could have spoken to?
Gavin, history always suggests that in wars like these, the political shift actually plays at the advantage of the autocracy or the dictatorship or the hardliners who are in power. My worry today is that internally in Iran, we're already seeing a political shift, but it's empowering the hardliners. Larijani was, by all means, a hardliner, but he was considered more of a pragmatic conservative. And he was a bridge between the hardliners and the conservatives inside the system, but also he was key in the negotiations of the JCPOA deal in 2015. He was a key negotiator. And he was also seen by some Americans as an acceptable figure to lead the transition in Iran should there be any transition or regime change. So there are serious question marks today is when you assassinate a key negotiator, someone who's considered as a pragmatic, what's the way out today and who will you negotiate with? And I think Trump is being asked, who are you going, if there is a resumption of negotiations, who are you negotiating with? When someone like Larijani is gone, I think the negotiated settlement, a political settlement is becoming more and more difficult. And what you hear also from people inside Iran is that, yes, there's a political shift happening, but it's bound to empower the hardliners. And unfortunately, it's not going to give what the people of Iran want and deserve, which was, they were fighting for freedom. They wanted a change of the Islamic Republic's current regime. This is not going to happen. And we also see this changing in the narrative and the expectations of the Americans and the Israelis. I don't think they're talking anymore about a regime change at this point, although my belief is that that's what Israel wanted when they went into this war, not a nuclear deal, because they were very close to reaching a nuclear deal, according to the mediators, which were the Almanis. So I think, yeah, but Israel has a history of assassinating negotiators, Gavin. We saw this with Palestinians as well.
To that point, when we look at, Laura, essentially a projection of what could happen next, if we look at the fact that President Trump has said this week, quote, "I'm not putting troops on the ground anywhere. If I were, I certainly wouldn't tell you." I want to measure that to the fact that we're also told since a few days ago, US amphibious ready group on the way to the Gulf, 2,500 Marines on board. There were suggestions that he might try and capture Hog Island. We said at the top of the programme there were strikes on the military facilities. What are you hearing from defence contacts about the operations and the intent?
It's really difficult also because they're not sharing that much with Europeans. So it's like the allies are also in the dark. So it's really difficult to know what they want to do. Also because they're not very consistent. Like sometimes they say they would do something and then they don't, and vice versa. So it's hard to know. Also, it's hard to know what Trump thinks. Like no one is in his head. So it's kind of hard to know. What we do know is Europeans are reluctant to get dragged in this. The French have already deployed military assets in the region. They're defending their interests and kind of because they have defense agreements with countries in the Gulf. So that's why they're like French fighter jets are in the region, etc. But overall, Europeans would like to remain as far as possible from this war for many different reasons. And they are also reluctant to kind of engage via NATO. They do not think that NATO should be dragged into this because the NATO mutual defense clause is activated when a country is under attack, and it's hard to see how the US is under attack. So Turkey arguably is a country who is under attack because Iranian missiles have entered its airspace, but Turkish officials have said repeatedly over the past week they would not trigger NATO's mutual defense clause.
Yeah, there is the risk, isn't there, that European countries say, like we've heard today, that they might take part in operations to secure the Straits of Hormuz. Caveat, brackets, after this current war is over, President Trump calling NATO allies cowards. It's a paper tiger. At the same time, there is a risk that whilst they might not want to join in, we're hearing from the International Energy Agency saying people don't understand the level of this oil crisis. It is the worst supply problem in history, to which they may be forced to react.
The longer the war drags on, the riskier it will be for Europeans, and the more likely they would be to get dragged into this. But they are really trying not to be. The statement yesterday, I think, about securing the Strait of Hormuz was vague. And
this is France, the UK,
Japan. And several other countries. And Emmanuel Macron, he said, because he spoke the day before, and he said that France would participate to an escort mission when the situation is calmer. And he specifically said that he used a word that is vague and that can encompass several different situations. So they are kind of keeping their options open, but they do not have an interest in getting into this war, also because the European public opinions are not enthusiastic about this war, because Europeans would rather focus on deterring Russia. The military assets are not like infinite. And we have seen already that some of the military assets that are in the Middle East right now were in Northern Europe for a NATO exercise in Northern Europe. So it shows that Europeans do not have enough to be everywhere. And obviously the Middle East is not a problem that they want.
Listening, Yaroslav, to Laura's point, another war goal we haven't spoken about, and I'll raise it with you, is what's left of the nuclear enriched uranium. Analysts saying that Iran basically, I think the New York Times reporting this week that the Trump administration is considered, if not considering, how to get at it. It's thought to be stored about 200 kilograms or so of highly enriched uranium under the Isfahan nuclear facility. And there was one option that I heard from the New York Times, sending special ops forces to seize the canisters. It sounds like a Bond film. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it sounds like a very, very complicated mission that would require securing a pretty large perimeter and also this uranium needs very, very specialized care. You cannot just sort of put it in the back of a truck and drive it out and fly it out. And so I think the more likely way of getting that would be through some kind of other agreement with whatever remains of the regime, using other points of leverage. And I think what we're hearing from diplomats is something like, for example, seizing the Harg Island, which is the main terminal for Iranian oil exports, and then using that as leverage for extracting the uranium and for the concessions on the Iranian missile program, the ballistic missile program. And I think, if you speak to officials, especially in the Gulf, whose countries were battered by these Iranian missiles, they would tell you that, before the war started, the talks were about the nuclear issue, and Iran only wanted to discuss the nuclear issue. But now you cannot really have any settlement without addressing the Iranian missile threat and drone threat and making sure that this sort of attack on the Gulf never happens again.
I want to talk about, and I'm going to mention this to Dalal, analysts, just listening to Yaroslav, the other point that analysts are making is this: the way to understand this conflict, the asymmetric warfare of this conflict, is something called the Mosaic Doctrine, that Iran apparently learnt the lessons from the Iraq War in 2003, the collapse suddenly of Saddam Hussein's military, and that it basically decentralized pockets of power with about 31 different districts. So following the death of Ayatollah Khamenei, these orders went out: you are autonomous, and you are carrying out these attacks based on subscribed plans. So it's very hard to know, whatever happens to Central Command, whether these attacks on the Gulf states right now are because of this Mosaic Doctrine.
We heard this from the Iranian foreign minister, Araghchi, when there were missiles hitting Turkey the first time. He said, we have decentralized command here. There are various groups. So when the head is killed, in that case it was Ayatollah Khamenei, there's a way for the Revolutionary Guards to operate, and this is exactly that they decentralize into many groups. I mean, we don't know if that's the case, if that justifies why some countries that Iran did not want to hit were hit. But I want to mention something about these Iran strikes on the Gulf countries. And I think what we're going to witness after this war ends is a new security order in the Gulf. The Gulf countries and the Arab countries have relied for so long on security cooperation with the US. And it somehow led to what we're witnessing today. Because of that security cooperation, we give you military bases, you provide us with defense and security. They're not secure, and their stability and peace is here really in danger. So we're hearing a serious conversation today among Gulf countries about a new security order, closer Gulf cooperation, less dependence on the US, maybe something that looks like an Arab NATO, if you want to call it that, but a new security architecture might see the light after this war. We'll see like a shift.
That's a very interesting point. The opening of a new chapter in kind of Gulf security failed, as many Gulf states might see it, by the US umbrella, as what's playing out. Saudi Arabia, we're already talking about reserving the right to respond right now, given that the drone strikes continue there. Yaroslav, just something added to pick up on Dalal's point as well. When it comes, and Laura said this, about the discomfort of European nations, we might be seeing a splinter group of the GCC, but there's this added context to think about. President Trump calling for help in the Straits of Hormuz. There's an incredible story from the Danish public broadcaster DR this week, reporting Danish troops went to Greenland in January with a plan to blow up the airport runways. Such was the height of the fear of European intelligence chiefs that the US, they thought, was planning to take it by force. What have you made of that?
Oh, it's very credible. I was in Davos on the day when President Trump arrived there. And this was the time when he was threatening a military invasion of Greenland. And European leaders there were taking it very, very seriously, not just the Danes, but also the French government, which also sent troops to Greenland at the time. And at a smaller level, also, the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Germans, and the others. And so there was this moment in a few days where European governments were very seriously discussing the possibility of an armed conflict with the United States. And I think the memory of that confrontation didn't happen colors decision-making in Europe now. It's one of the reasons why Europe is so reluctant to help the United States in any way in its war against Tehran. Let's not forget this. This is the first war that America is fighting without any allies since World War II. In every other war, there was someone else alongside. There was Australia and South Korea and Vietnam. There was the UK and Spain and the Iraq invasion. There was, all of Europe in Afghanistan. But here, really, no one is alongside President Trump's America, and that's Greenland is a key answer why.
One country we haven't mentioned, you did at the top, Dalal, is Lebanon. So the Israeli military is saying it's carried out more than 2,000 targeted strikes to dismantle Hezbollah. Lebanon's ambassador to UK this week said that Hezbollah isn't a proxy, it is Iran.
What Hezbollah did 2 weeks ago showed us that they were not putting Lebanon's interests first. Hezbollah is a Lebanese movement. It was a resistance movement, let's say, up to 2000. It liberated the south of Lebanon from Israeli occupation. But I think after that, they made a lot of strategic mistakes. They were involved in political assassinations. They were involved in the Syria war. 2006 was another war which we were dragged into without, wanting to do so. And now again, but at the same time, Israel was violating the ceasefire agreement, thousands of violations. And today, the Lebanese are paying the price for, the Hezbollah-Israel war. The government wants to disarm Hezbollah. This is an official position. But what the Americans are asking of Lebanon today is not realistic, Evan. We're not going to be able to disarm Hezbollah under the bombs. There needs to be a ceasefire. This is what the Lebanese president proposed. Ceasefire first, and then disarmament. We also asked for direct negotiations with Israel, but Israel is refusing, and it's buying time to advance militarily on the ground. And yes, disarmament of Hezbollah, Gavin, but at what cost? I was just talking at the beginning about the ground invasion. There are serious concerns today that the south of Lebanon, this part south of Litani, might never come back to the Lebanese. When we talk about a buffer zone, this is an occupation zone. It's not a buffer zone. People were already displaced in 2024. 100,000 of them never came back to their villages that were completely destroyed. Israel occupied 5 positions. Now they're occupying much, much more. But I feel like it's actually the reality. The Lebanese government is incapable of doing anything at this moment. And it's in a wait position because, as I mentioned, the Americans have all the cards. They are the ones who can stop this war and impose a ceasefire. The French are trying, and I've been following French diplomacy. Today, Jean-Noël Barrot was in Israel. But the echoes of this meeting are not positive, Gavin. The Israelis are not going to listen to the French. And as I said, they're going ahead as long as the Americans are not stopping them.
It is very interesting. Dalal, thank you. Let's move from the battlefield in the south of Lebanon, the battlefield from the skies in the Gulf, to the bureaucrats in Brussels this week. And this image taken by the AP photographer Geert van den Veenhart captures the seeming discomfort of the Hungarian Prime Minister in dealing with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky's speaking by video link here on all the screens. All Europe's leaders are watching him. Viktor Orban's removed himself. Can you see in the corner here on the screen? He's the one figure that's holding up a €90 billion EU loan to Kyiv, which is seen as a vital lifeline to defending against Russia. He's holding it up because of a diplomatic row over an oil pipeline that supplies Hungary and Slovakia with Russian oil that runs through Ukraine. The Druzhba pipeline, Druzhba meaning friendship, was hit by a Russian strike in January, stopping the flow of oil. 2 months on, it's still the same. Viktor Orban is pointing the finger at President Zelensky, saying it's deliberate, accusing him of sabotage and blackmail. Victoria, we come to you. After that photo was taken, what happened next? There was no breakthrough moment, was there?
No, not at all. And actually, that photo was widely covered in Hungary as well, because that is such a symbolic photo of the Hungarian Prime Minister standing there all alone. I mean, this is something we've seen before. If you all remember, there were instances when Viktor Orban decided to go and have a coffee instead of voting with the European Council, but this is something new. But as you probably know, what you are seeing on this photo is Hungarian domestic politics. It doesn't have to do anything with international politics. is just Orban showing strength to his own Hungarian voters at home just 3 weeks before the election, that he's not going to be blackmailed, that he's going to try and keep his word to his electorate.
Laura, listening to Victoria, Politico, your magazine picking up on the frustration of Volodymyr Zelensky this week. This was the headline in recent days saying, what's gotten into Zelensky? What are you making of this row? Where's it heading? And also just the importance, as you see it, this tranche of money for Ukraine's defence.
The problem is time is running out for Ukraine because the coffers are empty, so they need this money more urgently every day. And Orban is not budging, and it's really a stalemate at this stage. Because Orban has made a brand out of blocking EU decisions, especially when they concern Ukraine. So it's really hard to know how they can overcome this. And in parallel, time is running out. So it's really a difficult situation for Zelensky right now.
A quick word, Yaroslav, you've covered this conflict for a long time. Pete Hegseth, the US War Secretary, is suggesting this week the US should not prioritise ammunition and munitions other than for its own national interests, and rather than sending, he said, to Ukraine. This was the quote: "We're still dealing with the environment Biden created, which was depleting those stockpiles and not sending them to our military. Every time we reach back and look at any sort of challenge we have, well, we always say, send it to Ukraine." What do you make of that?
Well, it's pretty disingenuous. The only type of weaponry where we have an overlap between the requirements in the Middle East and Ukraine are the interceptors for the Patriot missiles. And the US has not been supplying this to Ukraine for a very long time. In fact, Ukraine is very short of its interceptors. And now the other overlap is really between what the Ukrainians can do and have learned to do and what the US and the Gulf states need. Because what we've seen in the last 2 weeks is that the Gulf states and the US have been not very efficient in dealing with these Iranian drones, the Shaheds, that have been raining death and destruction on Ukrainian cities for the last 3 years. And it's Ukraine that has sent hundreds of troops actually to the Gulf states to help them with anti-drone defenses, to teach them in how to detect these drones and how to combat them using cost-efficient technologies that have been developed in Ukraine.
It's a very good point. Yaroslav, to your point and to Victoria's point a moment ago, which he said, Viktor Orban, this is about domestic politics. This takes us to the upcoming Hungary elections. Viktor Orban is the longest-serving leader in Europe, first in power in '98 when Chirac was the French president, Helmut Kohl was the German chancellor, Tony Blair was the British prime minister, and Paul Leval, who's the biographer of Orban, Europe's new strongman, claimed that Orban borrowed elements from Blair's PR, the so-called sofa government and spin operations. Orban was seen as a centrist back then, before turning to the populist right. Now, Orban lost power in 2002, came back in 2010. He's been a leader since. He faces what's widely considered his biggest challenge yet in a rival, Peter Magyar, with his party TISA well ahead in the latest polling. Elections in 3 weeks' time. There were huge rallies for both parties on Sunday. Victoria, there have already been arguments, as I mentioned at the outset of this programme, of crowd sizes and rallies. How does the race look to you?
Well, it's actually extraordinary. And as you mentioned, I actually have a few colleagues who haven't really remembered any other prime minister but Viktor Orban, which is truly extraordinary, especially even in European standards. Well, the rallies that we're talking about happened on the 15th of March, which is the biggest national holiday of Hungary, remembering a revolution that happened in 1848. And both parties, both Fidesz, the governing party, and TISA, which is basically a newly formed party of Peter Magyar that was only founded 2 years ago, they organized huge rallies because we only have 3 weeks till the election. And for both parties, it was extremely important to show that they have more followers.
When I try to understand the main election rhetoric coming from each camp at the moment, what are they selling? What are they campaigning on?
Well, Fidesz has a campaign that has been going on not only for a month, but it's also been going on for years, basically. They are trying to put fear into society. Viktor Orban is trying to portray himself as a politician who knows what to do in conflict, who knows how to protect Hungary from conflicts, from wars, And he also promised that Hungary will stay out of any war, wherever that is. On the other hand, Peter Magyar really is concentrating on domestic politics, on economy, on struggling healthcare, and he's not really concentrating on international politics yet. Maybe we'll see that how that plays out after the elections. But at this time, the biggest contrast between the two parties is that Orban is trying to present himself as the continuation of force, the continuation of peace in Hungary, and Peter Magyar as a challenger who is promising a better life for Hungary and concentrating on smaller domestic affairs.
Reporting Hungary for the past decade or so, going back and forth to Budapest, not as much as you're covering this on the ground every day, but one thing that strikes me, and you'll see it in detail, many media outlets coming under ownership linked to business figures or foundations seen as sympathetic to Orban's governing party. Analysts talk about this being a highly government influenced. How are you seeing the comparative coverage for each candidate?
Actually, it depends on what media we are talking about, because as Gavin, as you mentioned, I can totally agree that at least 60% of the Hungarian media is basically controlled by the government, and that includes public media as well. So if there is somebody in Hungary turning on public media, you will probably not see anything about Peter Magyar, or if there is a coverage on Peter Magyar, then that is going to be a negative coverage. So it is a very difficult media environment in Hungary, and it's very difficult for the Hungarian voters, like especially those who only see public media, to decide which party to vote for.
Jaroslav, just listening to Victoria, Orban, a figure in Brussels who officials might be crossing their fingers this week. Glad to see the back of him, but a useful ally for the Trump administration.
Right. Well, obviously there is a lot of hope in many European capitals, and to be frank, in Ukraine, that this time around, Viktor Orban will lose the election. I think we'll have to see. Polls have been wrong in the past, and just the way the Hungarian electoral system is structured, there is a huge built-in advantage for Orban and his party, Fidesz. But it's remarkable how, if you look at billboards in Hungary, it looks like he's running against Zelensky. He's running against Ukraine, not against Peter Magyar.
That's a very important point. I also note your comment this week, Jaroslav, to the point that US officials were seen to be asking Belarusian officials to help join and keep the Straits of Hormuz open, to which I think your comment was they can go and join the Hungarian Navy, which is an oxymoron, isn't it?
Well, since 1918, yes. But to be frank, Peter Magyar has been tweeting about comments by...
Oh, Jaroslav frozen for a second. We'll try and get back to Jaroslav. Victoria, just a quick thought on Peter Magyar. Is he a charismatic figure? I'm just wondering to the extent that, as a former Orban party insider, that he's hampered by his past proximity to the establishment politically.
He's definitely charismatic. He's also young, he's sporty, he's stylish. So at this point, he is someone who is really followed by a large number of people, and he is seen as a complete opposite to Orban, even though, as you mentioned, he was a member of Fidesz, and he was actually leading companies that were close to Fidesz as well.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you to tonight's panel for all your insights, years of on-the-ground experience and intelligence that is not artificial. In the studio, thank you, Laura Chiali, Defence Correspondent for Politico. Thank you, Laura. Thank you to Dalal Mawad, Paris-based correspondent for Al Arabi and author of All She Lost. Thank you to Dalal. Budapest, thank you, Victoria Shadult, senior journalist, editor of Hungary's HVG publication. And tonight's Hungary-splainer, thank you, Victoria. And to the man whose awards cabinet has just grown larger overnight, despite the bombs and the drones he can see from his window. Yaroslav Trofimov, Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent of the Wall Street Journal and author of No Country for Love, as well as Our Enemies Will Vanish, the Russian invasion and Ukraine's War of Independence. Thank you to you, Yaroslav. Thank you for watching and listening to the podcast version of our programme. It's now 14th in the top 100 global podcasts on current affairs, according to millionpodcast.com. So thank you for watching. And the billboards in in Paris this week are currently plastered with a space movie out this week. Tonight in the US, Dernier Chance, or Project Hail Mary, based on the best-selling book by Andy Weir about a mysterious entity dimming the sun and threatening Earth's extinction, with Ryan Gosling as a middle school teacher drafted in to help, save humanity, of course, making friends with an alien he calls Rocky from another star system whose species is facing the same threat, showing, well, what happens in the face of destruction when you work together to create, hinting maybe that a world of mysterious entities trying to dim the sun, well, you could be a Rocky or a Ryan. We'll see you in 7 days for The World Next Week.
Dr. Grace, the world is counting on you.
No, I'm sorry. Ha ha ha.